Hello, and thank you for joining College to Consulting. So in this class, I'm going to go over how to utilize a framework to structure and solve any case. Most of my students, when we start off, they have a question, and their question is, there are so many types of cases out there. How do you know which framework to use? And I tell them that one of my favorite quotes is from Bruce Lee, one of my idols. And Bruce Lee says that when you fight, you have to be very fluid like water. Same thing when doing a case interview. Bruce Lee should have been a consultant, is basically what I'm saying. But when you have a case, be flexible with your framework. And if you stick to the general principles that we're teaching, you can create a framework for any type of case. I guarantee that. So, let's say this. There are many types of cases, but focus on the base. Now, here's what I mean by many types of cases. There are human capital cases, and there are market sizing cases, and you have mergers and acquisitions, and you have profit and improvement, and it's just so much stuff that it's almost impossible to really categorize all the types of cases that there are. But you can do this. This is essentially the core of what you should be looking at. So here's how I tell people this. Every case is rooted in a solution. There's a problem and you need to solve it. And that revolves around growth, profitability, and efficiency. Those three things are essentially what you need to improve. It can be one of them, it can be all three of them. But you're looking at this for every type of case. Even if it's, for instance, if it's human capital case, you're probably looking at profitability in terms of we need to reduce headcount, or efficiency, how do we get people to work better, or to make sure talent is transferred over if someone leaves, stuff like that. If you're working with an operational improvement type of case, then you're looking at how do we make this more efficient, where do we move the supply chain around to make things easier for transportation, and lastly, if you're looking, let's say, a new product development case, now you're looking how can we grow the company and how is it profitable. So really this is the core of what you should be focusing on. And then on the outer core, you should be looking at how this applies to any industry or to any service. Okay? Let's do an example to show you what I mean. Let's say this is the case. Which geographic areas should J.Crew expand to? And for those who don't know what J.Crew is a very high level or posh type of clothing line. Okay, similar to Calvin Klein, I guess, or Tommy Hilfiger, or stuff like that. So all we're focusing on now are frameworks. Okay, so I'm going to draw out my sheet of paper. At the top, I'm going to write framework. This is pretty standard. I'm going to look at the market. Okay, so just like I mentioned before, I want to know what is the product. So J.Crew is mainly in retail, and they really sell clothes, and they have some other stuff, but really clothes is their big thing. Competition I mentioned before, Calvin Klein, Tommy Hilfiger, some other of the bigger posh names out there. Market size is how many people or how much money is generated through this type of industry annually. And then market share. And market share is of that percentage, of that pie, how much of that pie does J.Crew have? Okay. So again, with this type of case, let's look back to the core of what I had just talked about. Growth, profitability, and efficiency. With this one, which geographic area should J.Crew expand to? It's really about growth and profitability. Efficiency doesn't really seem to be that big of a player in this type of prompt. And also, because we're looking at profitability, I want to look at revenues first. So in revenue, what would make sense to look at? Well, I want to know what are the potential revenues from these geographic areas. Do we have to have custom products? So for instance, one thing that we might have to have is different styles depending on the countries. Brazil might be different than a style that we would have to sell in China, which would be different from a style that we have to sell in Russia. Okay? And then it would be good to look at what are the possible revenues by country. Okay, so now we have a better sense of profitability. Well, only half of it because we're looking at revenue. So we need to look at the other half, which is essentially costs. Now with costs, I want to look at fixed costs. If we go to these areas, what we have to do is we have to build up infrastructure or buildings to sell our J.Crew clothes in. What are the variable costs? Now we need to ship these clothes or create these clothes in these different countries and hire more people and salaries and to deal with all this other type of stuff. And are there any barriers to entry? Okay, barriers to entry could be, for instance, embargoes. So Russia, with what's going on, might be a little bit tough to get into, but who knows? There may be other barriers to entry, such as economic ones, besides just cultural ones. There could be also tariffs, or it could just be that it's not the type of style that would be sold in another country. It just doesn't fly in whatever country. And then what is the total cost to enter and to develop by country? Remember, keep in mind we're looking at growth and profitability, mainly profitability for this geographic one, which makes sense. Great. I want to also look at operations though, because now we have the profitability sector down, and I want to know how can we make this thing work. So we look at operations, and what this means, I want to look at what are my suppliers. Am I getting textiles or cotton or clothing, whatever, from different areas of the world, which would make sense, or am I doing it all in one spot and then shipping it out? Do I have enough capital? Capital meaning machinery or infrastructure to produce what's needed to be produced. Logistics, how do I ship material from one area of the world to another area of the world in order to see if this makes sense? And then culture. Culture is a really, really, really big one. So culture, even if we get the green light that we can enter Brazil, how do I do it? Do I just go in there doing a regular campaign like I would do in America, or do I have to change it to fit the needs of the Brazilian consumers? So again, like I mentioned, in every core of the case, there's growth, profitability, and efficiency. With this case, it's which geographic area should J.Crew expand to? You can tell from that that's really, well, why do they want to expand? They want to expand for growth, okay? Now, how do you determine which area to go into? By profitability, because we want to know which country would be the most profitable, which we answer by revenue and cost, and then we want to know how do we do it, which is the operations piece, okay? Let's do another example to make this a little bit clearer as well. I'd say we get this type of case. How can the city of Chicago gain more revenue? Okay, a very different case. But I'll show you how we're going to answer it, sticking to that core of growth, profitability, and efficiency. Again, I have my separate framework sheet of paper that I'm going to write. I'm going to look at the market first. Now, you might be saying, what is the market of the city of Chicago? What does this even mean? Well, there's always a market for any case that you're looking at. So I want to know, what is industry? This industry is essentially city funding. How do other cities do it? How does New York, DC, Austin, Seattle, how do they do it? What are some other exemplary cities, like we're talking about, that what have they done to gain revenue? For market sizing, what you can do is you could say, for any type of federal funding, where is that going? What is a market size federal funding? Is most of it going to bigger cities by population, or is it by need, or what's going on? And then market share is how much of that do these different cities get? Is Chicago in the top 3, top 5, whatever, okay? Now, this case is only about revenue. Nothing about this case seems to be about cost at all. How can the city of Chicago gain more revenue? So I'm only going to look at revenue. So again, we're looking at this core of the case, which is growth, profitability, and efficiency. This one really just seems to be about growth, because costs don't seem to matter for this type of case. So I want to know, what are Chicago's current revenue streams? They have taxes, or housing taxes, and they have fees when you get tickets and stuff like that, as well as maybe events and other services that are owned by the city. Of those different products that are essentially products, what is the biggest margin on it? Is taxing a big margin, meaning that the cost to operationalize that is low, or is it pretty high? And what's the change year over year? Okay, and that revenue. So have taxes increased? Have they decreased, or are fees going up over the years? And then I'm just going to look at volume. With volume, because this is now about growth, I want to look at how can the city of Chicago market these products that will gain revenue. What are new markets for them to enter, such as Chicago is starting to do this thing where they're trying to really enter the entrepreneurship or the tech bubble that's coming up right now by having things such as 1871 and some other components to really facilitate growth within the city. Is there bundling available? So the ability to bundle these products together to make it easier for the residents of Chicago, who are essentially the consumers, to keep spending money in the city. Are there cross-selling capabilities? Cross-selling is essentially getting someone to buy something else from that store. So essentially, Chicago would be the store. If consumers are using these types of services for the city, or they're paying, such as to go to different events like festivals and whatnot, can we cross-sell them to go to other events that will be held by the city to generate more revenue? And last, our capabilities. What are other capabilities that Chicago has that it can use to generate additional revenue? Okay? And we'll get into this in more of the growth strategy, but this is just stuff to think about. So we've gone over 2 cases, just making the frameworks, and I want your paper to look exactly like how we drew it out. And remember, by searching and looking for that core, which is growth, profitability, or efficiency, we're able to create frameworks based off of that. So now you should know that when you get a case, you are equipped to determine what are the components I need to look at to develop an initial framework to help you guide yourself for the rest of the case. Okay? We'll go into this in more depth, and you will see more examples as we go throughout the course, but I would highly encourage you every time that you watch this or where you do a case to get out a separate sheet of paper, to draw it out, or to follow as we do this throughout the remainder of the class. Okay? Thanks, and I will see you in the next class.